visit us at driftdevelopment.com.
Alright guys, let's go create our first database. But before we do that, let's talk about what a database is and what I am doing when I create a database. First of all, databases are amazing at creating a way for you to search through all of your data. They're also great at mass calculations on your data and also mass manipulations of your data. What you're really doing when you create a database is you're creating an organized way to get all of your data in one repository so that you can go in and access it later, manipulate it later, and present it to the user in any way, shape, or form. It's also a great way of standardizing your data so that you can run intelligent calculations on your data. Let's go ahead and let's create our first database. We're going to go into SQL Server here, and we're going to right-click on Databases. We're going to say New Database. I'm going to give it a minute to come on up and present to us its little console here. What we want to do is we're going to create a database called Udemy. This will allow us a little test area while we're playing inside of this Udemy presentation. When you come into this Options tab here, there's not a whole lot that you really need to know about. Most important thing that you need to know about is actually not even on the creating a database side. It's on the actual server itself. Let's right click on the server. We're going to come into Properties. We're going to come into Connections. Actually, we're going to come into Security here, and we're going to make sure that SQL Server and Windows Authentication Mode are both set with this checkbox right here. And what that does is allows us to connect to the SQL Server through a named user and not through the only logged in users on the network. This allows your development environment to connect to the SQL Server and run queries against it. Alright, so cool, we have our first database created. By default, it comes with a series of system tables and also some system views and store procedures. We'll go ahead and look at them. Now, these system store procedures and views, you really don't have to know anything about. But they're here for you if you need them later on. Alright? So let's get started. Let's create our first table now. Alright, we're going to right click on tables here. And we right clicked and we clicked on this table feature here. And now we're going to start creating our columns. By default, every table I create has an ID column in it. And the ID column is always an int. And we do not allow nulls. Okay? So we've created our first column, and now what we have to do is go ahead and actually tell this table that this field is an identity. We do that by scrolling down here. And you see this identity specification right here? We're going to change this drop down and we're going to say yes. What that does is allows this to automatically increment our ID field for us. We're going to create a table. The table we're creating here is going to be called person. So while we're creating the table person, we're going to give our person a name. And their name is going to be a varchar, and we're going to stick with Max. They're also going to have an address. Also varchar max. And that's how we're going to end this first table. So let's click the save icon right here. And we're going to call this table TB person. Congratulations, we've created our first table. We can come in here, we're going to refresh, and now we see our person, TB person, sitting right here right now. Now what we can do is we can right click on this and say edit top 200 rows. If I'm going too fast, I'm going to try and slow down right now. So we click edit top 200 rows, and what this allows us to do is enter in some random information for our new table. So the first person we're going to add is going to be Rico, and he's going to live at 1234 Street. And after we do that, you see that the first ID autofills. Through the UI, we can go back and we can edit this, and we can rename him to Rico 2. Now while we're doing this, you notice that we don't have to actually click a save button because all the data persists immediately. So we're going to add a second person. We're going to call him John. And he's going to live at XYZ Main Street. And we'll add one more person. And it's going to be Sally. And Sally will live at 567 North Meadview. Alright, so right now in our database, in our first table, we currently have 3 people sitting inside of it. What we're going to do is we're going to add a second table. But first I want to explain to you the concept of foreign keys. Foreign keys are imaginary lines that can, that actually connect 2 tables. So the foreign key we're going to add is going to be for gender, alright? But what we're going to do first is we're going to create a table called TB gender. And inside of TB gender, and we'll do this right now, we're going to have an ID field again. It's going to be varchar max, or ID fields are always integer, sorry about that. So it's going to be int. We're going to remove the allow nulls, and then we're going to have another field called gender. And that will be varchar max. So we have our 2 fields, and what we have to do is we have to again go up and we have to make the first ID field the identity. So we're going to expand this, and we're going to change isIdentity to yes. And then we're going to save our table, and we're going to call it TB gender. Alright, so let's refresh our tables list, and now we have 2 tables inside of it. Awesome. So what we have to do now is we're going to actually go in and we're going to edit our first table, TB person, and we're going to add a field in there called gender ID. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go and we're going to right click, and we're going to still do this through the UI. Later on we're going to do this through actual SQL statements, but in the beginning let's just make some massive progress by using the UI. So we're going to come in here, we're going to add a new field, and it's going to be called gender ID. And this field will be an int, and we will not allow nulls. Actually, we will not allow nulls because we have data that does not have any filled-in values for gender ID yet. So let's go ahead and save, and then we can go back in and we can edit our top 200 rows on TB person and see that our new column gender ID is now there. First, we have to create some genders. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to right click on TB gender. We're going to click edit top 200 rows. And we're going to create our first gender, that's going to be called male. And we're going to create our second gender, and that's going to be called female. So now we have IDs that correlate to these 2 genders. And what this does is this allows us to normalize our data a little bit and not have to actually type in or store the whole word male or female. So Rico is a male. So let's go ahead and we're back on TB person again. And we're going to update gender to 1 because this 1 correlates to the gender ID over here. So we're filling in gender ID to point at the ID field of TB gender. And that is the concept of a foreign key. It's basically relating 2 tables by a column in that table. So we'll also go back to John, and John is a male. So we're going to set his gender ID to 1. And we're going to set Sally's gender ID to 2 because Sally's a female. So now we have these 2 tables, TB gender, and we have table TB person, and we have an imaginary foreign key. It's not a true foreign key yet because we haven't actually created that connection yet. But we have 2 tables, and we have 1 table that points to another table via a naming convention. That's where we're going to stop today. We'll get back